Hello everyone, I am Dr. Rangana. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to learn about breathing and exchange of gases, which is the 14th chapter of NCERT Biology Class 11. Let's start. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acids and fatty acids, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. We have learned this in the chapter of cellular respiration. So the oxygen here comes from the breathing, and the glucose, amino acids, fatty acids are the breakdown products of the foods that we intake. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cells, and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Now you place your hands on your chest and you can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following sections of this chapter. Let's start with respiratory organs. Mechanisms of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending mainly on their habitats and levels of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterids, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle, and insects have a network of tubes, which is known as tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Special vascularized structures called gills, and the respiration through gills is known as branchial respiration. It is used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas vascularized bags called lungs are used by the terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Respiration through lungs is known as pulmonary respiration. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frogs can respire through their moist skin, which is known as cutaneous respiration. So here we have learned about mainly 5 types of respiration. Respiration through diffusion over the entire body surface is known as body surface respiration. Respiration through tracheal tubes is known as tracheal respiration. Respiration through gills is known as branchial respiration. Respiration through lungs is known as pulmonary respiration, and respiration through moist skin surface is known as cutaneous respiration. Moving on, we are going to study about human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lips. As we stand in front of a mirror, we can see we have external nostrils above our upper lips on our nose. It leads to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chambers opens into the pharynx, a portion of which is common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called as sound box. So up to this, what we have learned, the initial respiratory pathway, which starts from the external nares or nostrils and goes through the nasal passage to a nasal chamber, which then opens into a portion of pharynx which is known as nasopharynx, and then it leads to another portion of pharynx known as oropharynx, and it is a common passage for both food and air. From the pharynx, it goes to the larynx region and then finally leads to trachea. The portion between larynx and pharynx is known as glottis, and it is covered by epiglottis, which we are going to learn later. Coming to larynx, what is larynx? It is commonly known as the sound box. Larynx is a cartilaginous box. Remember, it is made up of cartilages, not bones. So it is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. The activity that I am doing now is I am talking. I am reading aloud. So there is sound coming from my larynx. Then during swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. So imagine pharynx and larynx to be two parallel pipes which are present in our body. So through pharynx, the number 1 pipe, the food goes to the stomach, and through larynx, let's say number 2 pipe, the air goes to the lungs. So if accidentally the food goes to larynx, it can cause severe problem to us. To protect this, there is a flap, a thin elastic cartilaginous flap which is known as epiglottis. This prevents the entry of food into the larynx. I hope it's clear up to larynx. Then from larynx, we get trachea, which is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of 5th thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. So there is continuation of larynx to trachea, which is again a straight tube, and it extends up to the mid-thoracic cavity, and at the level of 5th thoracic vertebra, it is divided into 2 pipes. One that goes to the right is known as right primary bronchi, and one that goes to the left is known as left primary bronchi. Then each bronchi undergoes repeated division. The initial divisions are known as secondary bronchi. Then when the secondary bronchi are again divided, these are known as tertiary bronchi. And finally, after division of tertiary bronchi, we get bronchioles which end up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi and the initial bronchioles all are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchiole gives rise to a number of very thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structures called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprise the lungs. So now you can think of this whole respiratory system as inverted tree. Imagine a tree with a single trunk. This trunk is known as the trachea here. Then the trachea divides into 2 right and left primary bronchi. Imagine this to be 2 branches of this tree. Then as we can see in any tree, all the branches goes through extensive divisions. Likewise, the bronchi divide into secondary and tertiary bronchi. Then again there is division leading to terminal bronchioles. And then these bronchioles give rise to alveolar ducts, which again after extensive division gives rise to small vascularized, thin and irregular walled bag-like structures which are known as alveoli. We have 2 lungs which are covered by double layered pleura. This pleura is the protective layer of our lungs, and there is pleural fluid between these two layers of pleura. What is the function of pleura? It reduces friction on the lung surface. As we can experience with each breathing process, each inspiration and expiration, our thoracic cavity goes up and down. So there is the change in the thoracic volume. If there is no pleural fluid, it can cause severe friction, leading to damage of the internal organs. So to reduce this friction and to make this movement smoother, there is pleural fluid in between the inner membrane and outer membrane of pleura. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. So, we know the lung is within the thoracic cavity. So, there is thoracic lining and there is lung surface. In between them, we get the pleura, and we know the pleura has two layers. So, obviously, the inner layer is in contact with the lungs, the organ that it's protecting, and the outer pleural membrane is in contact with the thoracic lining, the space where the lung resides. The part starting with the external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their ducts form the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. So the respiratory system in case of humans can be divided into two broader parts depending on the function they carry out. The first one is the conducting part, which conducts the air, the inspired air as well as the expired air, and the respiratory or exchange part where the exchange of gases takes place. The conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air to body temperature. So the conducting part here performs three main functions. The first one is transportation of atmospheric air to the alveoli, to make it clear from the foreign particles, to humidify it, and also maintaining hemostasis of the body, which it does by bringing the air to body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by a dome-shaped diaphragm. So, these are the boundaries of the thoracic chamber where our lung resides. Dorsal means the posterior portion. So, posteriorly it is bounded by vertebral column. Ventrally means the front. In the front it is bounded by the sternum. Lateral portion is lined by the ribs, and on the lower side it is supported by a dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lung cavity, or which is also known as pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is very much essential for breathing, as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Now, as we have learned the organ system of respiration, let's go through the steps which occurs. Respiration involves the following steps: breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. So the first function is, the first step of respiration is we are inhaling the atmospheric air. It is going through the conducting part, then it goes to the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system, and again after the process of cellular respiration is done, we are exhaling the air. So the carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. Then when it goes to the alveoli, the diffusion of gases, that is oxygen rich air from the atmosphere and the carbon dioxide rich air from the cellular respiration, it occurs across the alveolar membrane. Then the transport of gases by the blood. So in the alveolar membrane, the oxygen rich air goes to the blood, and blood carries these gases to whole body. Then after the transportation, the blood reaches to the tissues. Then again there is diffusion. So diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. Then tissues take up the oxygen. It goes through cellular respiration. Different catabolic reactions are there, and the output is carbon dioxide. Then this carbon dioxide is again transported by blood to the alveoli for expiring. Then utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of carbon dioxide. So let's go through the steps of respiration once again. Firstly, breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. Diffusion of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. Then transport of gases by the blood. Next, diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. And finally, utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of carbon dioxide. Let's move to the mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. We all know the diffusion occurs from the high concentration to the low concentration. In case of gases, from high pressure to low pressure. Likewise, inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, which is intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. So, if we imagine atmospheric pressure to be the standard 0, then the intrapulmonary pressure, which is less than that, is negative. So there is negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. So when the atmospheric pressure, that is the pressure outside our body, is higher than the pressure inside the pulmonary cavity, that is intrapulmonary pressure, then by default the flow of air goes from the high pressure gradient to the low pressure. So expiration occurs by default. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostals between the ribs, help in generation of such gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the antero-posterior direction or antero-posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscles lifts up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. So, let's move to this diagram. Figure 14.2a. What's happening here? Diaphragm is contracted. So, it's pulled downward and the ribs and sternums, by the contraction of muscles, these are raised. So obviously there is natural increase in volume of thorax, which causes the negative pressure gradient here and leads to the air entering into the lungs. So the overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume. An increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs. That is inspiration. Next, relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal positions and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. So, we are coming to figure number 4.2b, which shows the expiration process. Now, as we have seen in diagram A, diaphragm is contracted. Then the diaphragm is relaxed in this diagram B. So after relaxation, obviously the diaphragm moves upwards and ribs and sternums are returning to their original position after relaxation. By this, the volume of thorax is decreasing. So the pressure inside the thoracic cavity is decreasing and the atmospheric pressure is now less than the intrapulmonary pressure. So the air is expelled out from the lungs. It is known as expiration. So coming to the text, this leads to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. So, you can experience it. Normally we are breathing, we don't even know it. It's a natural process. But sometimes we can do forceful breathing, like forceful inspiration and forceful expiration. So, in this case, some additional muscles comes into action, which are the additional muscles in the abdomen. The names of these muscles are abdominal muscles known as rectus abdominis, external oblique, internal oblique and transversus abdominis muscles. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. This is very important. You can do it as a little experiment. Take a stopwatch and start counting how many times you are breathing in and breathing out within 60 seconds. So the average is 12 to 16 times per minute for a healthy human being. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary function. So spirometer is very important as it has a clinical implication. It assesses the pulmonary functions by measuring the volume of air that is involved in each breathing movements. Because in some diseases, the volume of air decreases substantially. Now, we are going to learn about the respiratory volumes and capacities. First, it is tidal volume. Short, we know it as TV. Tidal volume is the volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. It is approximately 500 milliliter. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 milliliter of air per minute. We can do this calculation by ourselves. So, if the tidal volume is 500 milliliter, that is, it is the volume of air during each normal respiration. We inspire 500 ml of air and the respiratory rate is 12 to 16 times per minute. So, in a minute, we are inspiring 12 times, let's say, and in each inspiration we are taking in 500 ml of air. So in a minute we are inspiring 12 into 500 ml, that is 6000 ml of air per minute. And if we consider the upper limit, that is 16 times per minute, then it becomes 16 into 500 ml, that is 8000 milliliter of air per minute. That's written here only. A healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6000 to 8000 milliliter of air per minute. Next comes the inspiratory reserve volume or IRV. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forcible inspiration. So suppose you have inspired air in tidal volume in a normal respiration, then after that you are forcing yourself to inspire more amount of air. That also has a upper limit. Like you cannot inspire continuously forcefully. So that upper limit is inspiratory reserve volume. It is the additional volume of air which we can inspire by a forcible inspiration. And the average volume is 2500 ml to 3000 ml. Now comes expiratory reserve volume. Suppose you have expired normally, then you want to expire more air forcefully, then you can expire only this expiratory reserve volume of air, not more than that. Then the additional volume of air a person can expire by a forcible expiration is known as expiratory reserve volume. This averages 1000 ml to 1100 ml. Now comes the residual volume or RV. It is the volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 ml to 1200 ml. So these are four basic lung volumes which we have learned. First one is tidal volume, then inspiratory reserve volume, then expiratory reserve volume, then residual volume. Residual volume is that volume of air which always remains within our lungs. Like after forceful expiration, we cannot expire more. So this volume of air is always there in the lungs.